Hi, I'm Karin Whiteside, and this presentation is about two ways at Reading that we've worked to align the discipline-specific Insessional EAP provision more closely with wider university processes and ways of communicating. The first is converting our non-credit courses to university-recognised non-credit modules. The second is creating a business partnership type role with schools, academic, language and literacy liaison. Both initiatives are at early stages, but I'm going to talk about how they have thus far helped or have the potential to help with our visibility to and recognition by the wider institution. So just to provide a bit of context first, Reading's Insessional is the academic English program, and there are three strands. We've got a discipline-specific provision, giving bespoke input to 27 degree program cohorts. We have an open sign-up provision of courses, webinars, one-to-one consultations, and we have a smaller graduate school provision, a set of research writing courses and talks which we contribute to the Reading Researcher Development Programme. The academic English programme sits within a school, the International Study and Language Institute, and as an academic school, there's obviously many benefits and affordances, but also some constraints for an insessional provision. So because we're a school, we're not always naturally included or visible in some processes and places where other academic services are. Our remit is international students. There is also study advice, which sits in the library and has naturally a higher profile across, for example, the Reading web pages, and their remit is all students, so home students and international students. So our USP has to be academic language. And I've more and more enthusiastically and explicitly lent into this over the years. So here is a provision we've created this year, and we've got language 4 in the webinar naming. We're leading on language, but also dealing with genre, structure, content issues whilst we do this. Trying in the naming to advertise the importance of language in a constructive rather than deficit way. Interestingly and unexpectedly, feedback so far from colleagues dealing with departments, going into boards of studies and staff student meetings, is that they felt being able to talk about these titles has made it easier to get people to understand what we do and the benefits of it than when we've talked about our course titles, you know, for example, essays, structure, argument criticality, dissertation and thesis writing. There's more fine-grained detail in these titles enough so staff in other departments kind of get more easily what we're doing and its value. But moving now to our discipline-specific provision. So here's a table which shows from 2016 to 2020 our discipline-specific provision and how it's grown, and this includes credit-bearing modules, non-credit-bearing courses, and also more one-off type inputs like workshops and lectures. And when I think about what the priorities were across that time, in terms of discipline-specific provision, one was obviously growth. I was also very concerned that our content was sound and of high quality, was underpinned by good pedagogic principles. I was very keen to raise awareness about what we really did and its value and our expertise, and that kind of linked to relationship building with colleagues across the university. But all of this was done in the context of living with rather than interrogating our positioning and our relationship to wider university systems, which was still mainly outside, very, very much kind of third space. And to think a bit more about this, I want to focus in now on our kind of course or module length provisions. So we have 3 credit-bearing modules. We're adding a 4th next year for Part 3, International Relations. And we have 27 that are non-credit. Rose et al.'s scaffolding academic cycle is quite useful for thinking about the type of input we'd provide to different cohorts. So a cohort like undergraduate finance with one of the lower levels of kind of entry proficiency need quite a lot of work around how to decode and deal with very technical texts in their field, with the vocabulary associated with that. Other cohorts like postgraduate law or construction management or psychology really only need focus on the genres in their discipline and how to write successfully within these genres. So coming back to the table, the 3 highlighted non-credit provisions sit within departmental non-credit modules, so either kind of skills or enrichment type modules. So that means that by 2019-20 we had 21 cohorts and 23 courses, more than 400 classroom hours running largely outside of regular processes and systems. So what does this mean practically? Some courses had a dummy module code. Some courses were an event and I couldn't get a dummy module code and I couldn't really understand the difference. It was sometimes possibly just talking to a different person about it. We had a wide range of orientations to central timetabling. So somehow undergraduate law dummy modules were fully integrated with the wider system, and I don't know how that happens. In postgraduate Henley Business School modules, it was very, very organized because we had a lot of classes for them, and it was in their interests that students were able to attend these and fit these into their programs, and that system kind of rolled over from year to year. For meteorology and some others, we had to start from scratch every year and kind of fit the module in very last minute around the program. And students were not enrolled via the central system, the Reading Integrated Student Information System, RISIS, and our virtual learning environments were supplementary, so they didn't roll over and they weren't linked to RISIS enrollments. And the idea of trying to officially modularize our non-credit courses and the potential benefits operationally in the first instance to this kind of slowly crept up on me, and I've looked back through notes and emails, and this was one of the emails where the idea started from, where I started thinking about this as a good idea and how to do it. So what did creating Reading non-credit modules involve? There was a process that started in January with submission of module setup requests, then drafting and submission of full module descriptions by March, and then the approval process involved the modules being integrated with RISIS, having their rolling over VLEs, blackboards created and being published on the module web pages. So we came up with a system for the module codes, starting with IL for ISLE for our school. For better or for worse, and I'm not completely sure, I didn't explore creating these modules via target schools and departments, so they'd have the target school or department module codes. I think this would have been more difficult and more uneven. Creating them via ISLE meant we could create them all at once. Modularization led to a discussion around naming and a more harmonized approach to naming of the modules. So for cohorts that needed more on the preparing for reading side of the scaffolding academic literacy cycle, titles such as Academic Skills and Language for, Academic English for the particular discipline were used. And then for disciplines that mainly needed the genres, writing for, academic writing for, dissertation writing for the particular discipline. And in the former category, we went for skills rather than literacy, which I'm still not sure is a very effective student-facing word, but I might be wrong about that. The process of drafting the module descriptions was another opportunity to work collaboratively on kind of harmonization of the messaging around the purpose and content of these courses. And we've ended up with a collectively created wording guide document that is live and subject to further changes and additions, which provides a range of options for the different type of scenario we encounter in terms of different cohorts and their needs. One thing we had to work on quite carefully was the passage explaining why we didn't have independent learning hours, the fact that these modules are designed to support students' independent work in their credit-bearing disciplinary modules. So here, for example, is our aims wording options. And as far as possible, we adopted the suggested wording from the module description guide in terms of describing learning outcomes in an achievable, accessible way, even though these are non-credit modules and we're not actually assessing students' progress on these. I think there's still a bit of work to do on this, but this is where we've got to so far. And there was a global context category, which we came up with a kind of harmonized message for, and decided that our contact hours were best described in the module description kind of language as seminars. So we went through this process, and lo and behold, a few months later, we had this set of modules. And this was quite surprising because I was fully expecting that at some point we'd be stopped and be told that no, this process wasn't for us and we weren't allowed to convert these strange non-credit things into official university modules, but that didn't happen. So we're on the module descriptions web pages under International Study and Language Institute, and there you can see some of our modules. They're the IL something A ones on that list. So each module also has its own module description page, and we can use that link to more easily and kind of clearly communicate what we are doing to departments. So it becomes much easier to talk about our provision. So here's just an example recently of a link to the module description I put into an email reminding colleagues in construction management of the need to timetable our inputs. So what have been the benefits for the Insessional team, for the coordinators who are responsible for sets of these modules across different schools and departments? The drafting of the modules collaboratively has allowed for a more explicit discussion and articulation of agreed aims, content and approach principles for ESAP Insessional delivery. In terms of the wider team delivering the modules, I think this more explicit articulation is potentially useful in further harmonizing our approach across modules where this is useful. Obviously, some individuality in approach is also useful. Thinking more broadly about our relationship to the wider institution before modularization of these non-credit inputs, they were not properly part of useful systems. So as I've talked about, part of RISIS or Blackboard or quality assurance and enhancement systems or timetabling. And because of this, they weren't really visible to the wider institution. Certain individuals knew about particular courses because they involved their students. And our outsider status was not helped and sometimes aggravated by all of the above. And here's my favorite Leunig cartoon, which I think illustrates this feeling. After modularization, we had automatic Blackboard rollover, automatic, well, enrollment, not automatically, but via RISIS, which linked to the Blackboards. We're now part of central QA, QE processes. We have the same module evaluation, content and processes as modules across campus. Timetabling's possibly becoming easier. I'll talk more about this a little later. And I think it's contributed to a more legitimate feeling school board of studies presence for this particular strand of our program. And for new modules coming online, they can go through the approval process of our board of studies. They're much more visible with the publication on web pages and with their incorporation on the module evaluation processes. They're more recognizable because we're speaking the language of the rest of the university in our module descriptions and in calling them modules. And I think this contributes to positive shifts regarding our professional identity and positioning in terms of having modules being module conveners. Here's a summary of feedback across a set of the modules. In the first year, we've been using these central module evaluation forms. So this provides us with a useful new metric to report to schools about our provision in a way that is much more recognizable to them than our previous more informal evaluation systems. There wasn't such an immediate positive effect on timetabling. Some of the kind of issues we had pre-modularization still persisted a little bit differently. So combined with the COVID situation, I think, and the stresses around that, there was a bit of a standoff for a couple of weeks where I was asked to timetable all these modules in relation to each other rather than in relation to the programs that they were supporting. Then we had conflicting stories from schools around how easy it was to just integrate our module with the wider diet for degree programs. So some schools were very resistant, some schools tried really hard for us. One school designed us into the enrollment processes fully, which was great. So another revelation was there's not really the system to harmonize with. So we felt like we were different and we were trying to be like everyone else, but everyone else is actually a bit different from each other. Schools behave differently, but we're trying harder overall to behave like everyone else, to insist that we're part of the May deadline for timetabling rather than being fitted in September, October. We're feeling a bit more empowered around getting this done. And I think once we've had 1 year where we have been part of the system, hopefully that will roll over. Okay, so the second thing I want to talk a lot more briefly about is the business partner role that we are in the process of creating, the academic language and literacy liaison role. The modularization process I've just talked about was quite a grassroots initiative. The creation of a liaison function was a top-down directive from our head of school, whose background is classics, not EAP, and who has previously held a university teaching and learning dean role, and who saw this in terms of a business partner role. However, we were given the space to shape the role in the way that we were happy with in terms of best communicating our expertise. So in workshopping the academic language and literacy liaison, the all liaison label, and in building web page communication about what this role entails. The All Liaison role is still in the early stages of being launched and established, and we are in the process of working out how to talk about the role to stakeholders and how to kind of insert ourselves into channels of reporting and communication. In this process, the fact our head of school knows these systems well has helped us in terms of having insider guidance around how best to achieve this. I just want to conclude by linking what I've been talking about to ideas from the third space literature. So MacDonald argues that a certain degree of status building can be accomplished by way of the quality of the engagement and pedagogy provided to students and other stakeholders and the networks we build across campus. And yes, I'd agree. And in terms of ESAP and sessional provision, all of these things are absolutely key. MacDonald also argues that the nature of our work in the third space seems to be less bound by definitions and categories. We've got flexibility, leeway to do things that we see as most fruitful. And yes, I'd agree. However, paying more attention to how institutional non-third space systems work, identifying the ways in which we can either conform to them or act more like them, these are very important for increasing our visibility and legitimacy. And the former, I think, is a more intuitive transition for an EAP practitioner from teaching to leadership. The latter possibly less intuitive, but just as important in terms of combating the anti-admin and the they attitude that Melinda talked about in her plenary today. Thank you for listening.